The human diplomat, Adrian Vallon, stood on the bridge of the spacecraft, gazing out at the sprawling space station ahead. This station was a meeting ground for species from all over the galaxy, a neutral place where tensions could be set aside for peaceful talks. Today was special. It marked the first time humans would officially meet with the Androsian Coalition, a powerful and advanced alliance of alien species. Adrian had worked hard to prepare for this moment, but now, as he approached the station, a feeling of uncertainty weighed on him. He had no idea what to expect. Adrian stepped off the shuttle and onto the station's gleaming floor. The atmosphere was tense, but not in a bad way. There was a kind of quiet energy in the air, as if everyone was waiting for something important to happen. Around him were delegates from all corners of the galaxy. Some species looked humanoid, others, well, they didn't. There were insect-like beings, towering giants, and creatures whose forms shifted with the flow of time. Humans were outnumbered, but their presence here was symbolic. It was humanity's first step into galactic diplomacy. As he moved through the station's main hall, Adrian caught sight of an Androsian, a woman who stood out from the crowd. She was tall, her skin a soft shade of blue with silver markings that seemed to shimmer in the artificial light. Her eyes, an unusual violet color, were locked onto him with interest. She wore a flowing robe adorned with intricate symbols that represented her people. Despite the difference in their appearances, Adrian felt an unspoken connection. She approached him confidently, her stride smooth and purposeful. Adrian couldn't help but feel a bit nervous. Was this the beginning of a complicated relationship, or would it be another cold diplomatic encounter? He tried to shake off the feeling as she came closer. "You must be Adrian Vallon, the human diplomat," she said in a calm but melodic voice. "I am Chiral of the Androsian Coalition. It is an honor to finally meet you." Adrian nodded, offering a polite smile. "The honor is mine. Chiral, I've heard a lot about your people. It's a pleasure to meet you in person." Chiral's violet eyes twinkled, and she seemed genuinely pleased. "And we have heard much about humanity as well. We are eager to learn from each other." The conversation flowed smoothly from there, and Adrian found himself intrigued by Chiral. She was clearly intelligent and thoughtful, her curiosity about human culture genuine. They exchanged stories about their respective worlds, discussing the challenges and triumphs of their people. Despite the many differences between them, Adrian found himself enjoying the dialogue. She asked questions about Earth's history, human survival in harsh conditions, and the ingenuity that had allowed humanity to thrive. In return, she spoke of the Androsians' deep understanding of science and the universe. As the conversation progressed, Adrian noticed something unusual. Chiral's attention to detail was not just intellectual, it was personal. She seemed genuinely interested in understanding what made humans tick, beyond just the surface level. Her questions were thoughtful, and her manner was warm. "Tell me," she asked after a long pause, "how is it that humans, despite their differences, have managed to build such strong communities? We Androsians are a very united species, but we have not faced the same kind of challenges that you have." Adrian thought for a moment. "I suppose it's our adaptability. Humanity has always had to find ways to survive. We've faced natural disasters, war, famine, and so much more, but we always seem to bounce back. We learn from our mistakes and keep going." Chiral's violet eyes softened as she nodded thoughtfully. "I can see how that would make humans resilient. It's inspiring." The conversation turned to lighter topics after that. Chiral showed Adrian around the station, pointing out various technological wonders and alien artifacts. It was clear that the Androsians had mastered space travel long before humanity, but they still appreciated the small details, the architecture, the art, and the cultures of other species. Adrian admired her passion for learning. As they walked, Adrian found himself thinking more and more about her. There was something intriguing about her presence. Maybe it was her intelligence, her grace, or the way she seemed to look at the universe with such wonder. There was a connection between them that Adrian couldn't quite explain. The day ended with a grand feast where diplomats from all over the galaxy gathered. There were colorful foods and drinks, music from different planets, and performances by various species. Adrian sat with Kyrell, discussing the future of humanity's place in the galaxy. The evening was filled with laughter and excitement, and Adrian felt something inside him stir. Maybe this was the beginning of something extraordinary, something far beyond just a diplomatic meeting. As the feast came to a close and the crowd began to disperse, Adrian and Kyrell shared a quiet moment together, standing by a large observation window that looked out onto the stars. "Thank you for this evening, Adrian," Kyrell said softly. "It's not every day I meet someone so intriguing." Adrian smiled, a spark of curiosity in his eyes. "The pleasure is mine, Kyrell. I think we're just getting started." Adrian found himself looking forward to his meetings with Kyrell more and more. What had started as a diplomatic exchange had grown into something deeper, something more personal. Every time they met, they found themselves discussing not just politics or science, but their hopes, dreams, and the things that made them who they were. It was strange but wonderful, a connection that neither of them had expected. It had been a few weeks since their first encounter, and the more Adrian learned about Kyrell, the more fascinated he became. She was incredibly intelligent, and her knowledge of the universe was vast. But it wasn't just her intellect that drew him in. There was something about her presence, the way she carried herself with grace and confidence, that made Adrian feel at ease. Their conversations were often long, filled with questions and discoveries. Kyrell was curious about humanity, about Earth, and Adrian was eager to share everything he could. He told her about the challenges humans had faced over the centuries, how they had come from a small divided planet to become a species capable of exploring the stars. Kyrell was impressed by humanity's resilience and creativity. One afternoon, as they sat in a quiet room aboard the space station, the topic of human biology came up. Kyrell had always been interested in the ways different species evolved, and she was particularly fascinated by how humanity had adapted to its environment. "How is it possible that humans can survive in such varied conditions?" she asked, her violet eyes wide with curiosity. "From freezing cold to sweltering heat, from deserts to oceans, you have such a range of habitats on Earth." Adrian leaned back in his chair, thinking. It's all about adaptation. Humans have learned to survive in places where no other species could. We've developed technology, yes, but we've also learned to adjust our bodies to fit the environment. Our immune systems are especially resilient. We've built resistance to many diseases over time. And we have this drive to explore and push boundaries. Kyrell nodded thoughtfully. "I see. You are constantly evolving, constantly changing to meet new challenges. It's truly remarkable." As they spoke, Adrian couldn't help but notice how her eyes seemed to light up whenever they discussed the wonders of human biology. There was an energy in her that made everything feel exciting, like every word he said was a discovery in itself. It was hard to describe, but Adrian found himself enjoying their time together more than he had expected. Over the next few days, Adrian and Kyrell spent more time together, sharing even more personal stories. They discussed everything from their childhoods to their hopes for the future. It became clear that, despite the differences in their cultures, they had a lot in common. Both were driven by curiosity, both had a deep respect for knowledge, and both were passionate about the possibilities of their respective worlds. One evening, after a particularly engaging conversation about the future of interspecies collaboration, Kyrell suggested they take a walk around the station. The stars outside the window shimmered brightly, casting a peaceful glow over the entire space. They walked side by side, the soft hum of the station's systems filling the air. Kyrell stopped at a large observation window, her eyes fixed on the stars beyond. "Have you ever wondered what lies beyond the stars, Adrian?" she asked softly. "What if there's something out there that we can't even imagine? A species we've never met, a civilization more advanced than we are." Adrian stood beside her, gazing at the vastness of space. He had often thought about it himself, the endless possibilities, the mysteries waiting to be uncovered. "I think that's why we explore," he said quietly, "to find answers, to see what's out there, and maybe to find others who are like us." Kyrell turned to him, her expression thoughtful. "Perhaps that's why I enjoy our conversations so much. They remind me that, even though we come from different worlds, we are both searching for something. We're both reaching for the stars." Adrian smiled, feeling a sense of warmth spread through him. Maybe that's what makes this so exciting. The unknown. The fact that we don't have all the answers yet. They stood in silence for a moment, both lost in their thoughts. Then Kyrell turned to him, her voice softer than before. "Adrian, I must confess, I didn't expect to connect with you the way I have. There's something about your species, your spirit, I suppose, that I find fascinating." Adrian felt a strange flutter in his chest at her words. He wasn't sure if it was the way she said it or the sincerity in her eyes, but something about it made him feel different. He had never thought of himself as anything extraordinary, just a diplomat, just someone doing his job. But with Kyrell, everything felt more meaningful. "I feel the same way," Adrian said, his voice almost a whisper. "I never imagined that my time here would lead to this, but I'm glad it did." Kyrell smiled, her eyes softening. "So am I, Adrian. So am I." The evening ended with them walking back to the main hall, the soft glow of the stars fading behind them. It was clear that something had changed between them. They had moved beyond simple diplomatic talks and had entered a space where something more personal was beginning to bloom. As they said their goodbyes for the night, Adrian couldn't help but feel a sense of anticipation. He wasn't sure where this connection would lead, but one thing was certain: the future had just become a lot more exciting. Weeks had passed since Adrian and Kyrell had started spending more time together. What had begun as a diplomatic exchange had blossomed into something more personal. Every conversation, every shared moment, had drawn them closer. It was clear to Adrian that Kyrell wasn't just another alien diplomat. She was someone who understood him in ways no one else ever had. And he, in turn, had come to admire her strength, intelligence, and passion for discovery. But as much as they enjoyed their time together, Adrian still couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more to their connection, a sense that it was destined for something greater. He often found himself thinking about Kyrell when they weren't together, wondering what it would be like to live on her homeworld, to learn from her people, to share a future beyond the stars. One quiet evening, as they sat in the observation room once again, Kyrell seemed unusually quiet. She gazed out at the stars, her violet eyes distant, lost in thought. Adrian watched her, sensing that something was different. He had grown used to her calm demeanor, but tonight she seemed distracted, almost anxious. "Kyrell," Adrian asked gently, his voice breaking the silence. "Is everything all right?" She turned to him, her expression serious. "Adrian, I need to tell you something. Something important." Adrian's heart skipped a beat. There was an intensity in her eyes that made him uneasy. "What is it?" "You know you can tell me anything." Kyrell hesitated for a moment, as if searching for the right words. "I've been keeping something from you, something I didn't know how to explain." Adrian's brow furrowed. "What are you talking about? You're not making sense." Kyrell stood up and paced, her hands wringing together as she spoke. "It's about us. About what happened when we first met. The bond we share. It's not just a connection between two individuals. It's something more. Something biological." Adrian's confusion deepened. "Biological? What are you saying?" Kyrell stopped pacing and faced him. "I'm pregnant, Adrian." The words hung in the air, and for a long moment, Adrian couldn't process what he had just heard. Pregnant? But how? He and Kyrell hadn't. Had they? His mind raced, trying to make sense of it. It didn't make sense, But then the look on Kyrell's face, the serious tone in her voice, told him that she wasn't joking. She wasn't making this up. How? How is that possible? Adrian finally managed to ask, his voice barely above a whisper. Kyrell's eyes softened, and she placed a hand on her stomach. It's because of us. Our interaction. I didn't understand it at first. But after careful analysis, the scientists aboard the station confirmed it. I'm carrying a child. A hybrid, part human, part Androsian. Adrian's heart raced, his thoughts spinning in 1,000 different directions. The implications of what Kyrell had just told him were overwhelming. A hybrid child. That was unheard of. No one had ever imagined that two such different species could create life together. It was biologically impossible, or at least it had been thought to be. And yet, here they were, standing at the center of a miracle. Are you sure? Adrian asked, trying to steady his breathing. I mean, this isn't some kind of mistake, is it? Kyrell nodded, her expression firm. I've had multiple tests. The results are conclusive. I am pregnant, and the child is human and Androsian. The scientists can't explain how this is possible, but it is. Adrian took a step back, his mind reeling. This was too much to take in all at once. He had always known that first contact with another species would be complicated, but this was something no one had predicted. A human Androsian hybrid. What did that even mean for the future of both species? What would this child grow up to be? But despite the flood of questions in his mind, there was one thing that stood out more than anything else. The child was a symbol of something new, something that had never existed before, a symbol of unity, of the merging of two different worlds. I don't know what to say, Adrian admitted, his voice full of wonder and uncertainty. This is huge, Kyrell. We're going to be parents. But more than that, this child could change everything. Kyrell smiled, her eyes filled with a mixture of excitement and fear. Yes, it could. But I believe it's a change for the better. Humanity and the Androsians have always looked at each other from a distance, each unsure of the other. But this child will be proof that we can overcome our differences, proof that together we are stronger. Adrian nodded slowly, the weight of her words sinking in. He had always believed in the potential of humanity to rise above its challenges. But now, with the arrival of this child, he saw a new possibility, a future where humans and Androsians, and perhaps many other species, could live and work together in ways that had never been imagined. As the silence stretched between them, Adrian reached out and took Kyrell's hand. We'll face this together, Kyrell. Whatever comes next, we'll face it together. Kyrell squeezed his hand, her smile returning. I'm glad you're with me, Adrian. I couldn't imagine doing this without you. For the first time, Adrian felt a deep sense of peace. The path ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in his life, he felt truly ready to face whatever came next. The news of Kyrell's pregnancy quickly spread throughout the space station, and with it came a storm of political chaos. What had once seemed like a small personal moment between two individuals was now a subject of intense scrutiny. The hybrid child, half human, half Androsian, was no longer just a biological marvel. It had become a symbol of something much larger, a challenge to the norms of both human and Androsian societies. On Earth, the reaction was mixed. While many humans were fascinated by the possibility of a new form of life, others saw the hybrid child as an affront to their traditions. News outlets across the planet exploded with headlines, some celebrating the miracle of interspecies cooperation, others warning that such an event could lead to unforeseen consequences. In the Androsian coalition, the reaction was even more intense. The Androsians, a species known for their strict cultural traditions and high value placed on their biological purity, were deeply unsettled by the news. While some saw the child as a hopeful sign of unity, others believed it threatened their entire way of life. The Council of Androsians, the highest governing body in their society, called for an emergency meeting to discuss the situation. Adrian was summoned to a tense meeting aboard the space station, where the representatives from both Earth and the Andresian coalition had gathered. Chiral stood beside him, her face pale but resolute. This was the moment when their futures, as well as the future of their child, would be decided. As Adrian entered the meeting room, he could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on him. The room was filled with a mixture of humans and Andresians, each wearing the stern expressions of those who were about to make life-changing decisions. At the head of the table sat Varnak, the leader of the Andresian coalition, his sharp, angular features showing little emotion. Beside him was Eva Helen, the human representative, her face calm, but her eyes betraying the stress of the situation. "We are gathered here today to discuss the unusual situation that has arisen," Varnak began, his voice cold and formal. "It has come to our attention that an unprecedented event has occurred. Chiral, an esteemed member of the Andresian scientific community, is pregnant with a child that is both human and Andresian. The implications of this cannot be overstated." Adrian could feel the eyes of the room on him. The tension was thick, and he knew that whatever happened here today would shape the future of both species. Chiral stood by his side, her hand gently resting in his, a silent sign of support. "What are the specific concerns about this child?" Adrian asked, trying to keep his voice steady. "We have always known that the galaxy is full of surprises. This is just another example of the unexpected potential of our two species coming together. Why is it so difficult to accept?" Varnak's eyes narrowed. "This hybrid child, as you call it, represents a disruption to our biological integrity. We, the Andresians, have evolved for millennia to preserve our genetics, our identity. This child, born of two different species, could alter the very foundation of our society. If it survives, what will happen next? Will we allow more such unions to happen? What does it mean for the purity of our species?" Chiral stepped forward, her voice steady but filled with passion. "This child is not a threat, Varnak. It is a symbol of what we can achieve together. We have always believed that our two peoples could learn from each other. This is the first step toward creating something new. Why must we see it as a problem?" Adrian could see the internal conflict on the faces of the Andresian representatives. Some looked away, clearly uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation, while others seemed to be considering Chiral's words more carefully. Eva Hahn, the human representative, spoke next. "Adrian and Chiral are right. This child is an opportunity, not a threat. We have the chance to bridge a gap between two species, to prove that we can overcome our differences. Humanity and the Andresians have had our struggles, but this could be the beginning of a new era." Varnak's gaze shifted to Eva, his voice rising with authority. "You underestimate the danger. Our people have always been cautious of outsiders. To allow this hybrid child to grow is to invite change, change that may destroy our culture." Adrian stood tall, feeling the weight of the moment. He had never been one for speeches, but now he felt compelled to speak. "What if change isn't something to fear?" he asked, his voice steady but full of conviction. "What if this change is exactly what both our species need? We've seen what happens when we hold on to the past too tightly. Wars, divisions, misunderstandings. We have the chance to be part of something greater. Let's not waste it." The room fell silent. For a long moment, no one spoke. The tension hung in the air, thick and palpable. Adrian could feel the weight of everyone's gaze on him, but he refused to back down. He believed in this child, in the possibility that their two worlds could unite in ways that no one had ever imagined. Finally, Varnak spoke, his tone softer but still filled with uncertainty. "We will need time to discuss this. It is not something that can be decided in one meeting." Chiral nodded, her expression a mixture of relief and frustration. "I understand. But I ask that you consider this carefully. We cannot allow fear to guide us." As the meeting came to a close, Adrian and Chiral walked out of the room together, their hands still intertwined. The future was uncertain, but they knew one thing for sure. They would face whatever came next, side by side. The weeks following the intense meeting aboard the station were filled with uncertainty. Despite Kyrell and Adrian's efforts to make their case, the Andrasian Council had remained divided. Some were in favor of embracing the child and seeing it as a symbol of cooperation, while others feared it would bring about the collapse of Andrasian traditions. The political climate was becoming more volatile, and there were murmurs of protests on both sides. Adrian found himself walking a thin line, caught between his loyalty to humanity and his growing commitment to Kyrell and their unborn child. He had hoped that the Andrasian people would eventually come to accept the situation, but it was clear that change was not going to come easily. What had once been a hopeful dream now felt like an uphill battle. One evening, as Adrian sat in his quarters, reflecting on the situation, his comms device beeped. It was a message from Kyrell. "Meet me in the observation room. We need to talk." Adrian's heart skipped a beat. He knew that Kyrell had been under immense pressure lately. She had always been strong, but the weight of her people's disapproval was starting to take its toll on her. He quickly made his way to the observation room, where Kyrell was waiting for him. She was standing by the large window, staring out at the stars, her expression distant. When she heard the door open, she turned to face him. Her eyes were tired, but there was a fire in them that Adrian hadn't seen in a while. "Adrian, I've been thinking," Kyrell said, her voice steady but filled with determination. "The council will never accept our child, not the way things are now. We've been trying to change them from within, but I don't think that's going to work." Adrian stepped closer to her, his concern growing. "What are you saying? Are you giving up?" Kyrell shook her head, a small smile playing at the corners of her lips. "No, I'm not giving up, but I think it's time for a new approach. We've tried to convince them with words, but they're not listening. It's time for action." Adrian frowned, unsure of where she was going with this. "What kind of action?" Kyrell took a deep breath. "I'm going to leave the Andrasian coalition. I can't stay in a place that won't accept my child. We'll go to Earth, together. It's the only way we can ensure our child grows up in a place where they are accepted for who they are, not what they represent." Adrian's mind raced as he processed what she was saying. Leaving the Andrasian coalition, that was a huge step, one that would have consequences for both of them. But he could see the conviction in her eyes, the strength of her resolve. This wasn't a decision she was making lightly. "I don't want to lose you, Kyrell," Adrian said, his voice soft. "But leaving the coalition, that's not just about us. It will affect everything. It could cause even more division." Kyrell nodded. "I know, but I can't live in a place that sees our child as a threat. I don't want our son or daughter to grow up surrounded by fear and hate. They deserve better than that." Adrian felt a weight in his chest. This was more than just a political dispute. It was about their future, their family. He wanted to support her, but he knew the consequences would be far-reaching. The Andrasian coalition would see this as a betrayal, and their decision to leave would spark a firestorm of political fallout. "Are you sure about this?" Adrian asked, his voice filled with concern. "This isn't just about us anymore. It's about two entire species. Are we ready to take on that responsibility?" Kyrell stepped closer to him, her hand resting on his chest. "We don't have to do this alone, Adrian. We'll find allies, people who understand what we're trying to do. We don't have to change the world overnight, but we can start by creating a place where our child can grow up without fear." Adrian looked into her eyes, seeing the determination there. She was right. The path ahead would be difficult, but they couldn't continue to wait for others to change. If they wanted a future where their child could live freely, they would have to create it themselves. "Okay," Adrian said, his voice steady. "We'll do it, together." Kyrell smiled, her eyes softening with relief. "Thank you, Adrian. I knew you would understand." The two of them stood together, looking out at the stars. The universe was vast, full of uncertainty, but now there was one thing Adrian knew for sure. Whatever came next, they would face it together. The next few days were filled with planning and preparation. Adrian contacted Earth's top leaders, urging them to support their decision. It wasn't easy. Some were hesitant, unsure of the political ramifications, but there were others who saw the value in what they were trying to do, and slowly but surely, support began to build. Meanwhile, Chiral reached out to like-minded Andrasians, those who shared her vision of unity and cooperation. It wasn't a perfect solution, and the road ahead would be fraught with challenges. But for the first time in weeks, Adrian felt a sense of hope. They weren't just fighting against something. They were fighting for something. As the days passed, the tension in the space station grew. There were whispers in the halls, rumors of defections, and talks of rebellion. But Adrian and Chiral were focused on their goal. Their child deserved a future where they could live without fear, and that was a fight worth taking on. As Adrian and Chiral prepared for their departure from the Andrasian coalition, the tension on the space station grew. They knew they were taking a monumental step, and the consequences of their actions were beginning to weigh heavily on their shoulders. The decision to leave the coalition was no small matter. It would not only affect their futures, but also the fragile peace between humans and Andrasians. Word of their plans began to spread quickly. Some Andrasians supported them, agreeing that their child's birth could be a symbol of unity. Others, however, saw it as an act of defiance, a betrayal of their ancient customs. The Andrasian Council was in turmoil, and rumors of internal divisions began to surface. Varnak, the leader of the Andrasian coalition, had been vocal in his opposition to Chiral and Adrian's actions, warning of the dire consequences of their decision. On the human side, the response was mixed. While many were sympathetic to their cause, others were afraid of the political repercussions. Earth's leaders were divided. Some saw this as an opportunity to strengthen ties with the Andrasian people, while others feared that the division could spark a war between the two species. Adrian had spent hours speaking with diplomats, trying to secure support, but the situation was growing more complicated by the day. One evening, as Adrian sat with Chiral in their quarters, the weight of their decision seemed to press down on them both. The space station was quiet, the soft hum of the engines the only sound filling the room. Chiral was staring out the window, her hands resting gently on her growing belly. Adrian watched her, feeling a mix of pride and fear. This child, their child, had the potential to change everything. But the road ahead was uncertain, and they had no way of knowing what would happen once they left the coalition. "I keep thinking about the future," Chiral said softly, breaking the silence. "I don't want our child to grow up in a world where they're seen as an outsider, where their existence is a symbol of division." Adrian nodded. "I know. But sometimes I wonder if we're being too ambitious. It feels like we're going up against something much bigger than ourselves." Chiral turned to him, her eyes steady. "Maybe we are, but I can't sit by and do nothing, Adrian. Our child deserves more than what the coalition is offering. They deserve a chance to grow up in a world where they're accepted for who they are, not where they come from." Adrian smiled, his heart swelling with admiration for her. "You're right. We can't wait for others to change. We have to make it happen ourselves." The next day, they'd made their final preparations. Adrian contacted the highest-ranking officials on Earth, informing them of their decision and asking for protection. The response was cautious but supportive. Earth's leaders agreed that their child's birth was a pivotal moment in history and pledged to provide security as they left the Andrasian coalition behind. Meanwhile, Chiral reached out to her fellow Andrasians who shared her vision, asking for their support. A small group of Andrasians, sympathetic to her cause, agreed to help her and Adrian escape the station undetected. Their plan was to slip away in the dead of night, before the Andrasian authorities could stop them. As the day of their departure approached, Adrian and Chiral knew they were walking into the unknown. They didn't know how the Andrasian people would react or what the future held for them, but they were certain of one thing. They were doing what they believed was right. The night of their departure arrived. The space station was quiet, most of the crew and diplomats asleep in their quarters. With the help of their allies, Adrian and Kyril made their way to the docking bay. Their hearts pounded in their chests as they moved through the dark corridors, careful to avoid detection. The weight of what they were about to do hung over them, but neither of them hesitated. As they reached the docking bay, Kyril turned to Adrian. "Are you ready for this?" Adrian looked at her, his eyes full of determination. "I'm with you, Kyril. Wherever we go together." With one final glance at the station they had called home, they stepped into the small ship that would take them to Earth. The engines hummed to life, and the ship began to lift off, leaving the space station behind. The journey was long, but it was quiet, save for the hum of the engines and the soft whispers between Adrian and Kyril. They spoke of their hopes for the future, of the child they were about to bring into the world. Despite the uncertainty, they knew that together they could face whatever challenges lay ahead. As the space station grew smaller in the distance, Adrian felt a mix of relief and sadness. Leaving the station meant leaving behind everything they had known, but it also meant stepping into a new life, one where they could raise their child without fear. It was a risk, but it was a risk worth taking. Kyril took Adrian's hand, her grip firm and reassuring. "We're doing the right thing, Adrian. Our child will have a future where they are free to be themselves." Adrian nodded, his heart filled with hope. "Yes, we are. And whatever happens, we'll face it together." The stars stretched out before them, endless and full of possibilities. For the first time in a long while, Adrian felt like they were on the brink of something truly extraordinary. The journey to Earth was long and uncertain, but Adrian and Kyril never wavered in their resolve. With each passing day, they grew more certain that their decision to leave the Andrasian coalition was the right one. As their ship traveled through the vastness of space, they spoke often of the future. The child they were about to bring into the world became the focal point of all their hopes and dreams. The silence of space was broken only by the soft hum of the ship's engines and the occasional voice between them. They spoke of their plans to settle on Earth, of the new life they would build for their family. It wasn't going to be easy, but they were ready for the challenges ahead. They had already faced so much: disapproval from both their people, the uncertainty of their child's future, but none of that mattered now. What mattered was the love they shared and the future they would create together. As their ship entered Earth's orbit, the planet's blue and green surface shimmered against the backdrop of the stars. Adrian gazed out of the window, his heart pounding in his chest. It felt like the beginning of something new, something they could shape into their own vision. Earth was a place of new beginnings, and for all its flaws, it was a place where they could be free. Kyril stood beside him, her hand resting on her stomach. "We're almost there," she said softly. "This is it, Adrian, the start of our new life." Adrian nodded, feeling a mixture of excitement and nervousness. "We've come so far. There's no turning back now." As they entered Earth's atmosphere, the ship began its descent toward the surface. They had arranged to land in a remote area, far from the bustling cities, where they could start their new life without the fear of being discovered. But even in this quiet place, they knew there would be challenges. There were still people who didn't understand their decision, and there would be many who would see their child as a symbol of division. But Adrian and Kyril had made their choice, and nothing could change that now. The ship landed smoothly on the soft ground, the engines powering down as they touched down. Adrian and Kyril looked at each other, their faces filled with both anticipation and apprehension. The world outside the ship was quiet, peaceful, exactly what they had hoped for. They stepped out of the ship, their feet touching the soil of Earth for the first time. The air was fresh, and the sun shone brightly overhead. For the first time in a long time, Adrian felt a sense of hope, of possibility. They were no longer fugitives, no longer running from the decisions of others. They had taken control of their future, and the world before them was full of potential. As they set up camp for the night, Adrian and Kyrael talked about what they would do next. There were still many questions about the future, about how their child would be accepted by both humans and Andrasians. But they knew that they would figure it out together. They were not alone, and they had each other. That was enough. Weeks turned into months, and slowly they began to settle into their new life. They built a small home in the peaceful countryside, far from the prying eyes of the world. They learned to grow their own food, raise animals, and adapt to their new surroundings. Life was hard at times, but it was also peaceful. They no longer had to hide who they were or fear the judgments of others. In time, Kyrael's pregnancy progressed, and their anticipation grew. They would soon welcome their child into a world where they would be free to be themselves. They didn't know what the future held, but they were ready for it. They had made a home, and they would protect it with everything they had. One crisp morning, as the sun rose over the horizon, Kyrael went into labor. Adrian was by her side, holding her hand, as they prepared for the arrival of their child. There was no fear in their hearts, only hope, excitement, and love. This was the moment they had worked for, the culmination of all their struggles and dreams. After hours of labor, their child was born. A beautiful, healthy baby, the perfect combination of human and Andrasian. They looked into their child's eyes for the first time and felt a love so deep, it was as if their entire world had shifted. This was their child, the future they had fought for, and they would do everything in their power to ensure that this child would grow up in a world where they were loved, accepted, and free. The journey had been difficult, and there would still be challenges ahead. But Adrian and Kyrael knew that as long as they had each other, they could face anything. Their child would be the symbol of what they had always believed, that unity between species, understanding, and love could overcome any obstacle. And as they stood together, gazing at the stars above, they knew that their story was only just beginning. The world was vast, full of possibilities, and together they would shape a future where their child, and others like them, could live freely, without fear, and with the promise of a better tomorrow.